So this is kind of what people did back then. This is a good description right from the sources. Hezekiah himself, whom the terror-inspiring splendor of my lordship, see that? Look at that. The terrifying splendor of my lordship had overwhelmed, and whose irregular elite troops, which he had brought into Jerusalem, his royal residence, in order to strengthen it, had deserted him. So he's, all his men did send me later to Nineveh, my loyal lordly city, together with 30 talents of gold, 800 talents of silver, ivory, chairs inlaid with ivory, elephant hides, ebony wood, boxed wood, and all kinds of valuable treasures. His own daughters, concubines, maid, and female musicians, in order to deliver the tribute and to obseisance as a slave, he sent his personal messenger. So that's Hezekiah. And what happens at the end? The Assyrians sent a guy called the Rabshakeh, which was an aide, and he would go to the walls of Jerusalem and yell up to the people, Hezekiah is going to kill you all. You need to surrender. He's listening on the Lord, and the Lord's not going to save you. And they answered back, speak. Don't speak in Hebrew. Speak in another language, because our people are listening to you, and they're getting fearful, and they want to quit. They want to give in. They want to stop fighting. So Isaiah came to Hezekiah and said, the Lord told me, if you'll stand firm, he will take care of you in this situation. Now thinking, here's the greatest power on earth. They've got thousands of men. You're starving to death. Your men have left you, and you're going to trust the Lord? So anybody know the next step? That night, 185,000 of Assyrian soldiers died. They were killed overnight. And the next morning, the bodies were all over the place. And it says in the Syrian records that Sennacherib went home. Yeah, he just went home and said, that's it, I'm not doing this anymore. So, I mean, that is an example of trusting God in many ways. All right, Bill is prodding me, so let's go.
Can I just say one thing, though?
Sure, say one thing.
I've been to Lachish, and Lachish is where the great siege is. He destroys Lachish first before he moves. The Rabshakeh, Sennacherib destroys Lachish first. But what's interesting about Lachish is you can still see the ramp that they built up. They have the main ramp goes up to the main gate. The gate was too powerful, so Sennacherib just brought in 100,000 slaves and built a ramp up the side of the mountain, and then they took their siege engines up there. And I actually stood in the same spot where Sennacherib gave the order that I give the permission for the slaying of all the people of Lachish. Think of that. Think of when next month I'm gonna do the Lachish reliefs for you. When we get done with 48,
He's supposed to get through 1948.
Yeah, he's got a real challenge ahead of him.
Right.
Watch me.
Get going.
All right, page 14.
There we go.
Page 30. All right, so there you can see Hezekiah's reign. There you can see the Rabshakeh, a picture I took of him. All right. Then Hezekiah got sick and got healed. Now look at the ministry. These are the prophets then, the minor prophets mainly, major prophets. You can see Nahum pronounced the judgment on Assyria, and the Babylonians destroyed that city of Nineveh. Jeremiah always talked about the coming judgment of the Lord. A lot of the prophets would do visuals. Anybody know what God told Hosea to do that you can't believe? I remember having to write a paper on this in college.
Marry a prostitute.
Yeah, in the name of Gomer, believe it or not. God said, marry a prostitute, and Israel was shocked, and then he turns around and says, that's you. You're abandoning the Lord, going to other gods. What an illustration. Anybody know what Jeremiah was forced to do to illustrate his message? Oxen. He had to put his hands in an oxen thing and march through the city like that, saying, someday you're going to be burdened like this. You're going to be captives, saying if you don't turn to the Lord. Okay, then we know about Daniel. Daniel's a book you study on your own, all right? It's separately, all right, because of that. Jeremiah also wrote what other book in the Bible?
Lamentation
Okay, and what was that? That was a Lamentations over.
of Jeremiah.
Yeah, over what? Yeah, he saw the destruction of Jerusalem and cried, how could God do this to his city? Yeah, so his strong message of Lamentations is all about seeing Israel fail. Let's see what did I put that. Okay, now go down to all right, Nehemiah. Okay, under the captivity of Nehemiah. Ezra and Nehemiah came about 8 years different. They came under a guy named Artaxerxes, who's the son of Xerxes. All right, and he sent them and let them come back and build the walls. So I think I did this with where did I? Okay. Yeah, where it sucks in the book of Ezra, it says Ezra laid the foundation of the temple, and then it says and he finished it. So he built the temple. Okay, so the temple destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. 70 years later, 516, some say 17, it was rebuilt, and so it existed until the Romans came in AD 70 and destroyed the second temple. All right, next you go down to the prophet Haggai. Haggai is one of the more interesting ones. I've actually preached a sermon on it a couple times. But he says things like, here you are in the land, you've come back, you are living in your, I like the translation, was your paneled houses, and building all your stuff and building your gardens and all this. You put money in a bag and it's full of holes. It falls out. Everything you do is failing, okay? Take a look. I'll show you this. Look at Amos 11, and show you what one message of the prophets. I guess we had a chance to go through all the prophets. It's right after Joel, if you can find it. Amos chapter 8. 48 years ago, I taught my first class, Bible class, in Hollywood, Florida. It was June of 1976, and the course was Major and Minor Prophets. I had just graduated from seminary, and I got hired on at the college I used to work for, used to go to, and they hired me as a new teacher, and I came in, and the first thing they did is sign me probably the most difficult class to teach, Major and Minor Prophets. And I had a class of like 45 because the seniors didn't want to take that with the teacher they had. He was like really boring. So they all said, "Oh, we got a chance to take this in the summer." So it was probably the best class I ever taught, the very first one. Now I'm nearly to my last one, so it'll be 50 years later. Okay, so then that's Haggai, Zechariah, all encouraged them to build the temple, get it done. And Malachi's idea was, this is the Messiah. Now we come to what's called the silent years. If you look at the years from 420 to 5 BC, they were the silent years. I found this, and I think it'll probably save time, Bill. It's a short description of the years between the the building of the temple and the coming of Jesus. It says, when the prophet Malachi stepped off the earth nearly 450 BC, no genuine prophet voice was heard for about 500 years. So what you're going to see with Amos, let me read these verses in Amos 11. Okay. Verse 11, Amos 8:11. It kind of capsizes that 500 years in the verses. Verse 11 says, the days are coming, declares the sovereign Lord. Okay. When I will send a famine through the land, not a famine of food or thirst for water, but a famine of hearing the words of the Lord. And so that's what this is. This is the famine, hearing the words of the Lord. There was no prophet. There was no teacher. Okay. There was a lot of squabbling going on from all kinds of groups. They were like leaderless. Okay. It's similar to us, except what? What do we have that they didn't have?
Bible.
Yeah, we have Scripture to guide us and direct us. But could you imagine trying to live the Christian life without the Scriptures? With just the Old Testament and just some of the law? So they were stuck, and so a bunch of people then got together and formed groups. And you've heard these people mentioned, but okay. We know this period as the intertestament period. It's also called the Second Temple, the time from the Second Temple to the First Temple to the Second Temple, or the Second Temple to the loss of the Second Temple. Yeah, that whole period of time from 516 BC to 70 AD. That's the period of intertestament period. Without a prophet. People of the land began to divide into parties and groups, each claiming the right to interpret the scriptures and lead the people. So with nobody in charge, no authority, nobody speaking for God, then they all went into things like that. And you can almost see the Protestant movement like that. We've turned into so many denominations now because we have no God except the Bible. And that was a big part of the Reformation, was you study the Bible for yourself. And that's why the Protestant church is different from the Catholic church, because the Catholic church has one leader. And a lot of them don't follow him, but they have one leader, the Pope. Protestants have no. Only people that, are teachers that have only authority they have is from the Scripture. Nobody has any authority in the pulpit except what they teach the Scriptures. That's the only authority we have. And so we judge people by how much they keep the Scriptures. So we have some guidance. But can you imagine not having that? Not having somebody like William to teach the Scriptures and such. The true understanding of Jehovah diminished among these people. So they lost contact with Jehovah. They had been close and followed him, and now it's diminished. Okay. But when John the Baptist and the Savior teaching the people, many were unable to uncover the traditions and beliefs had developed intensely in the period. So they had lost it, and even when Christ came and John came, they still had trouble getting going again, having the same thing. All right. As we understand the 500 years and the conclusion that accompanied them, we can understand more of the Savior's ministry and renew our commitment to follow him. So when we understand what happened, why did he wait nearly 500 years, all right? Prophets such as Isaiah and Jeremiah, which we talked about just a minute ago, warned Jerusalem citizens that if they continue breaking the covenants of the Lord, the city and the temple would be destroyed. Now Isaiah does give a message that we will return. God eventually will return us to the city. Okay, and Jerusalem finally fell in 587. I always thought it was 586, but dates are a little different. It has to do with the secession years and non-secession years. But Jerusalem finally fell, and the exiled Jews were forced out of their destroyed homeland. And then it says, see Psalm 137. You probably heard this verse. But by the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. People in Babylon sat there and by the river, the Tigris River, and wept, knowing that they had lost their homeland, and it's their fault. Now you wonder what would happen if they had obeyed the Lord. So I speculated on that. That's hard to speculate. What would happen if they had kept the covenants and kept that? Would history be a lot different? But they failed. All right. So, God knew that, but that was the plan. All right. Including the Samaritans, who eventually intermarried non-Israelites. Later, exiles began to return to Palestine and to rebuild their homes and religious life. The temple in Jerusalem, finally rebuilt 516, once again became the center of Jewish worship. Because the Jews rejected the Sumerian offer. Did you know that? The Sumerians offered to help rebuild the temple. Okay, and Zerubbabel said, don't. We don't want you. You're not pure Israelites. You're half and half. To help reconstruct, the Sumerians built an alternate temple. So you've probably been there, right?
Where's that?
In Mount Gerizim?
No, I have not.
No, okay. That's where the northern kingdoms built a temple to copy the south. So we have a lot of fraudulent copycats in Christianity. And it's bad when you see some. You've probably read stories and seen videos about pastors and stuff that have been basically a fraud. Okay. But this revival did not last long. So you're wondering what happened between that time between Malachi and John the Baptist. After Malachi, the prophet Amos had prophesied. The Lord set a famine in the land, not a famine of bread, or thirst or water, but a hearing the words of the Lord. The pivotal change had major consequences. People attempted to understand and live the law without our prophets' authoritative teaching and interpretations. So they had to fend for themselves for all those years. Okay. As an effect, this apostasy, apostasy means to stand away from. The people divided into groups and varied political, religious, and social agendas. So when there's a vacuum, people tend to fill that leadership vacuum. I've seen that happen in churches where, somebody will leave and somebody will fill that vacuum, which is generally good, but not always. Okay. The religious groups tried to live the law of Moses as they understood it. But each group interpreted the scriptures from such varied perspectives that Jewish society became more and more divided. As a result, the true meaning of who the Savior would become was confused. So they didn't have a real understanding that Jesus was about to come. Okay, they got the verses, but they pulled away, started ignoring it. We have a similar situation today with people not coming to church and things like that, right? All right, and church membership is down considerably in recent years. Okay, let me skip a little bit of this. One of the voices of the prophets fell silent. The priests and their fellow workers, the Levites, became the most important officials. So the Levites said, we're the ones in charge now. Even though they're not getting any direct revelation from God, they're the ones teaching and going their own way. That's why we picked up all those habits of Levites, all those washings and all those things that people don't do, like touch electricity and that kind of stuff. Did you even read that that Jews would take a cup of water and a toothbrush and move it 2 miles from their house so they could say, that's my home. I can go further. Things like that. It's really, really things that were incredibly... Okay, so this was going along for a certain number of years. You know, that people were divided, teaching what they wanted to teach. The Persians weren't too upset. As long as you obeyed, the Persians let you worship whatever God you wanted. So that went on for years. But the change comes with good old Alexander the Great. So he conquered the Persians in 332. When he died, his kingdom was divided among his generals into 4 general sections. Okay, and the Seleucids were the one that took over Syria and Lebanon, okay, and all those areas around Jerusalem. Okay, and the other one was Ptolemy, who took over Egypt. He just told Alexander, you know, I'll just take that. That's all I want is Egypt. I'll be happy with that. And so that was the way it got divided. So the Jews were living under these two kings, Seleucids and Ptolemaics. Okay, and in 167, then the Seleucids took over. And in the beginning, the Ptolemaics had control. They lost it to the Seleucids, so they battled back and forth over and over. If you look at the map, I guess you can see that the Seleucids were up here and the Egyptians were down here, and guess what was in the middle? They battled over this area back and forth. And at various times, one controlled it, then they lost it, somebody else controlled it. But in 167, then, Seleucids outlawed the Jewish faith. So now we're moving in that direction after all those years. The big thing happens where this people come on the scene, descendants of Alexander, and they outlaw the Jewish faith, forbidding circumcision, desecrating the temple by offering swine on the altar. Could you imagine anything more resulting to Jews than putting a pig on the altar in Jerusalem? Many Jews resisted, led by a family known as the Maccabees. That's where they come into play. And that's part of the Apocrypha, the books of Maccabees, all right? Other groups emerged. The Pharisees were an independent group, and they came in after the Maccabean War. The Sadducees came in. They said, we only believe in the 5 books of Moses. So we have people like that only believe in what? I don't know if you've been through that controversy with the King James Bible, but there are a lot of Christians that won't use anything but the King James Bible, not knowing the history of it and all that stuff. They say, we're King James only. Yeah, I know people like that. I went to school with one of them that has just gotten that conservative, not knowing some of the things behind that. Okay, and they had the group called the Hasidians, who were called the pious, the Pharisees, the Sadducees. All right, I just want to move ahead because Bill's looking at me. All right. Now the idea was because they lacked the guidance of a true prophet, they were led to their own interpretations. So it was a real period of confusion with all these groups claiming it, gaining control of this, fighting over stuff. Regardless of their religious persuasion, righteous men and women still look forward to the coming of the Messiah. So people that were still tied into Judaism in the Old Testament were still looking for the Messiah. They had a different idea who he would be, but they were still looking for that. And the big mistake was the fact thinking that he was going to come and defeat the Romans and put Jews back like they were under the Maccabees. Right? One group waiting for the Messiah was the Essenes. Now we know they're responsible for what big document? Documents. Yeah, they were the ones that wrote, and they lived a very, very communal life and did many washings and stuff, and they took themselves out of the corrupt. Because what did Alexander the Great bring into the mix was the Hellenistic. He loved Greek culture, and he forced his men to marry Greek women, and he had them worship the gods, okay, the Greek gods, all their pantheon. Okay, but also in that time period was the Septuagint, where they translated the Old Testament into Greek. However, without a prophet to guide them, the Jews debated the meaning of scriptures about who the Messiah would be. While most people waited for Davidic Messiah, that's why it was important to follow the Davidic line. Who was the last king? You look at the king list, the last king, all right, if you know that the Davidic line is on the right-hand side. Okay, the last king being Zedekiah, who was the uncle of Jehoiachin. And guess what happened to him? He rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar, and he took him in handcuffs, murdered his whole family in front of him, and then poked his eyes out. Can you imagine that? The last thing you see is the murder of your kids. So what does that tell you? He couldn't be the Davidic line because he had no kids. He had nobody survived him. Okay, and we know that Jehoiakim was cursed, so he couldn't be it. And that leaves Jesus as the only person that could claim the throne of David. So they were right in reading Scripture that we're expecting a king who will be the king of David. Who will that be? Now remember, Joseph was a descendant of David. Okay, all right. He was the great-great-grandson of Zerubbabel that went all through that line. Okay, like the Reformation that preceded the Restoration, intertestament period was a witness event that prepared the world for Jesus. Okay, so that the idea, it says in Galatians that the Messiah came at the right time. When all the fullness of time was come, Jesus appeared. So for some reason, historically, Jesus came at the very right time. We had a thing called the Pax Romana. You heard that term in history? Which is the Roman peace that from 27 BC with Octavian to Marcus Aurelius in 180, there was peace. The Romans had killed the pirates and made the roads and had good administration, good law, good governance, and so it was a good time to come. Okay. Others thought the Messiah would be a Levite. And then this, I'll move on. Scribes, Pharisees, Essenes, Sadducees did not accept John the Baptist. That was the problem. They should all have agreed that this is the one announcing the Messiah, but they rejected John the Baptist. Okay, and then Jesus came and claimed to be God and all that, and they rejected the message of John the Baptist. All right, go on to page 15. You can see the post-captivity period with the ministry of Nehemiah, page 15. 15. 15. Yeah, 1-5. Tim Tebow's number. Just remember that. All right. Then you get first year of Cyrus. He allows the Jews to return. That was his policy of letting them do it as long as they kept in line and paid their taxes. The story of Esther comes along, and this is another case where we almost lost the line of the Messiah. Okay, a guy named Mordecai. He wanted to kill all the Jews. He thought they were the ones causing problems in the kingdom. So the king ordered them all to be killed. And so they decided when they're going to do it, and they cast lots, dice. That's called a Purim. Okay, that's the dice. And it landed on the 15th of Adar, and that's the day they were all going to die. But Esther then, as one of the favored queens of the king, she rushed into his court and said, "Don't." And she threatened, because anybody who would come in the king, interrupt the king, would be killed immediately. She survived. And the king said that and ended up hanging Mordecai. And so because of that, the Jews could have been wiped out and no Messiah. So there's another case where that almost happened. Okay, then the captivity under Nehemiah, the prophets, the last of them in the silent years. Okay, so then go on to the non-biblical ascent then, the Persian Empire. Okay, and they were responsible to let the Jews go back and worship. All right, we're on page 16 now. Comes right after page 15. And then the Romans come in. See, that's the idea. This all set up. and we've gone through the Maccabean War. Israel gained, the Maccabees actually it became an independent for about 150 years. When Pompey came in 63 BC, he took control of Palestine for the Romans. And it became under Roman control until what? Okay, there's the conquest. You can see the story of it. Okay, the Romans put Herod in charge. He became the king of the Jews, all right? Okay, he was a Roman client. All right. Okay, so let's skip over now to okay, well, you can see on page 18, there's the Roman emperors. Maybe go back one page. Take a look at the Roman emperors. Augustus, birth of Jesus. Tiberius, okay, the adopted son of Augustus, became the crucifixion. There were some bad emperors, Claudius being one of the worst. Nero, you remember him with the persecutions. He used to light Christians on fire to light his garden parties. Okay, and so he blamed the fire that destroyed a big part of Rome on the Christians, all right? Okay, the Jews revolt again, and the temple's destroyed. Okay, then you can go down the list of it. Hadrian then becomes a big player in this whole history of Jews, because he allowed the Jews to go ahead and worship in the temple, but they rebelled against him. Thinking what? Why would they rebel against him? Thinking Messiah is going to come and take care of us. They expected this is going to happen. We're just going to rebel, and God will come back and wipe out the Romans. It didn't happen. So because of that, he gets mad, all right, at the Jews. He makes Judaism illegal. He razes anything left of the temple. He changes the name of Judea to Syria, Palestine. Okay? And that's where the name Palestine comes into play. The first time that it's really called that. And why did he call it that? Because he didn't like the Jews. He wiped out Judea. And so I don't know how anybody takes a look at the situation that Larry's going to get into and think the Jews don't have ownership of the Holy Lands. They have ownership. They were there before Palestine was even named Palestine.
Another quick interjection there. The Jewish revolt led by Simon Bar Kokhba, Rabbi Judah the Prince, who had 25,000 disciples, named Bar Kokhba the Messiah. Okay, and when they were both executed the same day by the Romans, Bar Kokhba and Rabbi Judah the Prince were both executed together. Wow. So it gives you a little.
He was, you could say mad is a good term.
Yeah, well, Hadrian hated the Jews anyway, and if he could kill their Messiah and their lead Jewish sage at the exact same time, that crushed Judaism for the next 800 years.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about now. Okay, so take a look at page 19. Ta-da! But the Byzantine period then. So for nearly 300 years, the Byzantines ruled Palestine. The Emperor Diocletian divided the administration. Constantine further divided it. He said the empire was too big, so he divided east and west. The capital city of the east was Rome, of course, and the capital city of the west was Constantinople, all right, which today is called Istanbul. It's the only city in the world that exists on two continents. Part of it's on Europe, part of it's in Asia. Okay? It's right where Troy used to be. All right? Now look what happens. Emperor Theodosius completely split the empire between the two. Okay? 395, his two sons. Many historians believe Justinian was the last of Roman emperor, the first of the Greek, the Byzantine. Now think Greek, Byzantine, Greek, Rome, Latin. So we split. Today the church is that way. Latin is the Roman church, and then the Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox are all Eastern churches, all right? Finally, the Emperor Heraclius, the Eastern Empire translated the Latin culture into Greek. So he got rid of the Latin influences and made it Greek. Palestine was conquered by the Islamic Empire in 633 at the Battle of Yarmouk. In 661, this other dude, Moby, the first became the uncontested caliph of the Islamic world after he was crowned in Jerusalem in 691. The Dome of the Rock became the first great work of Islamic culture. Now the Muslims take over. We're almost to 1948, Bill.
You're still a long way.
Not really. Okay, Muslim period then. The Muslims defeat the Byzantines. Crusaders gained control for a little while. First crusade, they did gain some areas and set up their own kingdoms. The third crusade is usually the most important because who was the one that led the crusade? Famous King Richard the Lionheart, yeah. Yeah, he died from an arrow, got shot in the leg with an arrow and died from that. All right? And Palestine became under the Mamluks from Egypt until 516 when Palestine was conquered by the Ottomans. All right? So now the Ottomans come down from Turkey and they take over. So it went Arabs, this area, Damascus became the head city for a while. So different Islamic dynasties. That seems to be the pattern of the world. We have different presidents, we have different kings, different province leaders and stuff. Okay. Egypt again gained control over Palestine under the leadership of Muhammad Ali. I don't think that's the boxer.
That before he would change his name? Okay.
Yeah, he refused to go in the army, so they...
But that is confusing when you go to Cairo, because in Cairo they had this massive mosque called the Mount Mosque of Muhammad Ali. And many Westerners think that is named after the boxer. Has nothing to do with the boxer, but that's why he took that name. Muhammad Ali changed his name. What was his?
Cassius Clay.
Cassius Clay changed, when he
Yeah.
converted to Islam, he took the name Muhammad Ali after this guy.
Okay. The British intervened in that should be 19.
19.
19.
Yeah, why is that 18?
Oh, wait, no, first you
No.
have 1832.
Maybe.
No, that's correct. It was
1832 to 1840.
All right. And returned the religion to the Ottomans, all right? The region to the Ottomans, all right? The Zionist immigration in Palestine began at the end of 19th century. Okay, guy named Thor Herzl. World War I began in 1914. The British issued the Balfour Declaration saying that Jews have the right to a homeland. That gave them the right to go back, so it made it legal. So you argue about, with Muslims or Arabs about that. The British Secretary of Ministry said Jews have the right, declared that because Britain controlled that area. The stating of the British favors the establishment of national homes on Jewish people. That was what they wanted. In Palestine, the British captured Jerusalem a month later, so they took Jerusalem back. The League of Nations then formally awarded Britain a mandate over the Palestine. The land west of the Jordan River was under direct control of the British. The land east of Jordan was a semi-autonomous region known as Transjordan. I guess that means across the Jordan, right? Under the rule of Hasmonite family. Transjordan was granted independence in 1946 and became the country of Jordan. So Jordan was created out of this get-together after World War I. An Arab revolt against the British rule and Jewish immigration between 36 and 39. The Arabs living in Palestine said, hey, wait a second. There's more and more Jews coming all the time. Almost like the Indians when the colonists came. Hey, there's more of these people. They keep coming. When do they stop? All right. This began the intense hatred between the Arabs and the Jews over ownership of Palestine. So there's where it all began, right? When the Jews went back and they got more and more people. But they bought the land from the Byzantines. The Byzantines still owned it. They bought it, all right? They purchased it. They made it grow. They made it flourish, okay? All right, now, after the Nazi Holocaust, pressure grew for the international recognition of Jerusalem state and Palestine. Okay, so people began to feel sorry for the Jews and said they deserve a homeland, all right? In 1947, the British announced their intention of ending the mandate over the region. They wanted to get out. We said, we can't do this. We've tried. There's no way to reconcile the two groups. The United Nations then took over, voted to partition.
Can I share something just real quick there?
Go ahead.
Why did the British want out so bad? Because Israel, under Israeli terrorists, began to execute and assassinate every British officer everywhere in Israel. Okay, and that's when you have the famous King David Hotel being bombed and 30 or 40 British officers being killed there. And then they began this mass, if a British officer was in a village, he would be assassinated. And Britain could only take so much of that. They weren't used to their officers being executed, so they really began to say, we're out of here.
Isn't there also something about France and?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they had divided up, France and England.
Yeah, because the U.S. did not join the League of Nations.
So that's really like today, if you're a Hamas leader in Gaza, you're gonna be dead, right?
Yeah, well, the first real terrorists, believe it or not, were the Israelis.
Yeah, and
They
the
really-
IDF says they're gonna kill them.
They created a fine art of terror and against the British Army.
Remember the
Didn't
British,
the whole
British,
thing start with Ishmael and Isaac?
Well, yeah,
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 really.
yeah, true, good
the-
point.
but the British did not let the Jews, stop the Jews from coming back because they were afraid the Arabs would join Hitler. So that's where you see the book, The Exodus, Leon Uris's book, that they had to fight their way back because the British had stopped them. Because they thought, oh, what connects the Arabs to the Germans? Hatred for the Jews. Yeah, so that.
Everybody needs to read the Hajj, H-A-Z, Leon Uris, and then his second book, The Exodus. The Hajj, though, people don't read, and it's the most fascinating because it talks from 1925 on. So I give that to everybody going. Did you read it, Sue?
No, I haven't
You
heard
treat
it.
well.
I was,
Shame on you.
I-
That's why you're not going to
I
Israel.
read it when he
That's the
said-
only reason,
That's why she's not going to Israel. She's going to study.
might be a war or something, I don't know.
Come on, Israel.
All right, who would like to read the last line on page 20?
We're done. Oh, it's
No.
not late.
The Independence State of Israel.
Hey, he got that done.
948 to present.
And Larry has to do that. I bet Larry can expand this sentence.
And right on time.